This is part 4 of the Earth's atmosphere topic. It's GCSE AQA chemistry, and it's a dual award topic, so dual and triple award scientists will need to be familiar with it. In this video, we're going to take a look at the impact of greenhouse gases and global warming, and potentially we're going to look at how we can mitigate those problems. As always, I'm going to recommend you pause the video and have a go for yourself on some of the activities. So we're going to start by taking a look at the map, which shows what would happen if sea levels were to rise by 60 metres, which is potentially within the reach of what could happen if we carry on as we are at the moment. And you can see there are huge amounts of land that are now underwater. Large parts of northern Italy, large parts of eastern England. We've got the west coast of France, and lots of North Europe is going to go, as well as moving over beyond Turkey into the west of Asia. Now, let's think about the problems that we could face if we got 60-metre rise in sea levels. And now you've had a chance to think about them, let's run through some. Well, the first one is that sea levels will rise, as we saw in the map. Ice caps will melt as the global temperature rises. That water that's currently floating on the surface is then going to become part of the oceans. The levels will rise. At the moment, the Arctic is melting about the area the size of Netherlands each year. There'll be more extreme weather events. It's not just about getting warmer. There will be more storms. There will be more flooding. And we're seeing that with what happens in the weather in the UK in the summer, for example. Temperature might increase to inhospitable levels where people cannot live. Where you have areas of desert at the moment where people can't live, if those high temperatures spread further, that means that you're having to migrate large amounts of population to cooler areas, and that brings further difficulties. It also means it's harder to grow crops, and if you can't grow crops in these places, that means you've got less space to grow your crops. The impact of that is that food prices will rise, and that will affect those people in poverty or close to poverty more than anybody else, but everybody will be hit by those increasing food prices. And there could be extinction events. We could lose huge amounts of different forms of animals, different species, and habitats for those species. We need to know what we mean by the term carbon footprint. And what we're looking for is the total amount of CO2 or greenhouse gases emitted during the life cycle of a product, service, or event. Now, we can all be thinking about things we can do individually. Governments can be thinking about what we can be doing nationally. And it's important that we have some of those ideas in our mind, whether it is turning off lights when we don't need them, not using electricity where we don't need to, walking where we don't need to use transport, etc. But we're going to look at a couple of specific examples that might help to reduce CO2 emissions that are being investigated at present. Carbon capture and storage, most of it comes from burning fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide is formed, escapes into the atmosphere. However, there are companies that are working on pumping the carbon dioxide deep underground back to the porous rocks where the oil and gas came from. Electricity costs would be higher if this were utilised. We'd be paying about 10% more on our bills. So what are the advantages and the disadvantages of this? Well, first of all, it will reduce CO2 levels in the atmosphere. That's a definite advantage, but it is more expensive. Would people be happy to pay an extra 10% on energy costs? Would the energy companies be willing to do that at the risk of losing custom? It would potentially need to be something that was agreed across all energy companies. And then we could look at reducing methane production. Emissions of cattle. If we ate less meat, we would need less cattle. Plant-based diets are also more efficient with respect to land use. What are the advantages? Well, it's fairly cheap. There's lots of alternative plant-based diets available. It certainly is doable. But the disadvantage is it is very difficult to convince meat eaters to change their diet. Lots of people have, lots of people do, but there are many, many people who would be resistant to giving up eating meat. Why is a plant-based diet more efficient with respect to land use? I'm going to start by drawing a little diagram. If I have some people living next to a farm that has a field for crops and a field for animals, some of those crops have to go to the animals that then go to the people. That's going to be inefficient. We're going to lose energy at some point. Some of the crops go to the people. But if I have people and I have, instead of animals, crops in both fields, all of those crops go to the people. Far more efficient. Crops currently being grown to feed animals could be swapped to crops grown for us. And what sort of compromise might allow people to continue eating meat but still lessen the release of methane? Well, it might be that people don't give up meat. It might be they reduce their meat intake. That could come from smaller portions. It could come from a meat-free Monday, where one day a week you don't eat meat. And that would be a stepping stone towards dropping methane levels within the atmosphere. Okay, that takes us to the end of this video. Thank you for listening and goodbye.